Hello and welcome back to Dadsplaining Politics.
Hi guys, welcome back. As always, it's Frederica and
Mark.
welcome back to our lovely show, Dad-Daughter Show, where we try and explain what's going on in the world to you, although I'm sure that none of us really know at this point in current events. So today we're going to focus on what's happening in the UK, everything to do with reform and the huge gains they've been making in the local elections as of recently. And then we're going to move to Australia because a lot of hot topics in Australia at the moment.
Two big topics we want to talk about there is the budget handed down last night by Dr. Jim Chalmers, and then lastly we will look at the Farrer by-election, this political earthquake in Australia with the One Nation roadshow rolling over the other parties in Farrer. So let's start off with the UK. Keir Starmer's leadership is on a knife edge at the moment. Over the last weekend, the local council elections were a total disaster for Labor. They were excellent for Reform. They won something like 1,000 seats in the local assemblies. They were good for the Greens as well. The Greens picked up some seats. The Lib Dems also did okay. And in fact, the Tories did terribly, but there were some bright spots as well. They held on to some seats that they thought might go to Reform. But overall, a huge landslide to Reform. And this has now brought to bear the leadership of Keir Starmer and the listless, directionless position of the Labor government in the UK. And just taking you back, those who are not political advocates and listened to all this the whole time, you might remember that Keir Starmer, just over almost 2 years ago now, won a landslide election in the UK.
Over 2 years ago?
No, almost 2 years ago.
It seems remarkable. It seems like 6 months.
No, it doesn't seem to much has been done. But a landslide election, and has really not driven a strategy or a agenda for the country. So, not a positive agenda for the country. So people seem rather depressed. He seems very robotic, Keir Starmer. So anyway, his leadership is really under threat. There are three potential candidates. Andy Burnham, who is the mayor of Birmingham. He doesn't have a lower house seat, so he'd need to get a lower house seat, which they could give him, a safe seat. And he's very popular in the Midlands and the North, so that would be good for Labor. Wes Streeting, who's the current Health Secretary in Keir's cabinet. And then Angela Rayner, who was in Keir's cabinet but had to resign recently due to some tax issues with her land tax, etc. Again, was in the cabinet. So it's going to be very interesting. This is all going to happen where Streeting is meeting Keir Starmer in the next few hours. And so over the next 24 or 48 hours, we could have an announcement that Keir has decided to step down and he will be the process to determine a new leader.
I mean, I think we're both hoping that he does step down because neither of us see a future in which it's possible that he can retain the role of Prime Minister if he stays as head of the Labour Party at the moment. I think as well it points to a shift in politics that's been happening over the past 20 years. I don't know if you agree with this, but I've been reading up in my politics course that I do, which is why we started this podcast. I've been reading up a lot about voter disalignment, which is when voters turn towards current events and turn towards the major issues happening within parties and the popularity of their leaders when the election comes around, rather than voting for the parties they typically vote for and having loyalty to one party. They vote based on the health of the party in the present moment. So I think that that's what we're seeing with Labour. The fact that Reform was able to decimate Labour heartlands. I don't think they decimated Liberal ones, but they decimated Labour ones.
And quite a few Tory.
Really? Yeah. Wow. So I think it says something about the nature of populism and how Nigel Farage is pushing this very successful populist rhetoric that obviously we've seen happen in America, we've seen happen in Hungary, and we've seen happen in the far right of France with Marine Le Pen. So we'll see how that continues.
I think the lesson for politicians today is the days of being safe and conservative and incremental changes are over. You need to be bold. You need to be ambitious. In order to take away the wind in the sails of populists. Okay, an example of this would be in the
That's just more populism.
No, in a way, but think about this in the UK. If Labor had said, we are going to rejoin the customs union of Europe because that is the way to gain growth back to the UK, and they were brave and courageous about that, they would not be in this position today. It would have caused a fracas, arguments with Farage, etc. But that discussion would be great because the UK has to have that discussion. Because if they don't, they're never going to grow. The economy is going to continue to languish. People are going to be unhappy. And that drives populism like Farage. Because if the government doesn't do a great job, okay, right-wing politicians will gain popularity.
Isn't it a wonderful irony, the fact that Nigel Farage created this situation in which the UK left the EU and now he is head of a party which is pushing for anti-immigrant sentiment? I mean, you start to think, damn, maybe he's some sort of genius. It's very, I would say it probably is quite easy to predict that this would be the outcome, going back to the Brexit referendum. If you're a political scientist who understands how the disruptions and the economic downturns caused by leaving such a successful customs union would cause, and therefore the anti-immigrant sentiment because they're blaming rising cost of living on the immigrants. I just think it's really interesting to reflect on that and see whether rejoining the customs union would have solved that problem or whether they would have turned to it as yet another issue to blame.
I think it would have. I would think it would have helped solve the problem, but I think what it requires is courageous politicians. It requires the Prime Minister to say to Farage, "That's bullshit. You were the architect of Brexit. See what you've brought to this country. It needs this level of passion and discussion in order to bring people over, and that's what I don't see in the UK."
Yeah, definitely. I also just find it confusing when it comes to Keir Starmer because surely he knows that his problem is how he comes across. Surely he knows that his character is the issue here. That's what people are finding fault with. Why doesn't he change it?
Because he can't. He has led his whole life. He's been knighted. He's
But
a
what,
sir.
because of pride?
for his-
He can't for
No,
his
because
pride?
he's a lawyer. He's run the public prosecution's office, and that's all he knows how to do. I'm sure he has the best communication strategists, right, who are probably pulling their hair out.
It's just my question though, if the fate of the UK is at stake, can't you put on a smile every now and again?
It's not just a smile, it's about him being relatable, right? If you think about people in the past in the UK, Tony, not just the Labour Party, Tony Blair, Boris Johnson, right?
Boris Johnson.
No, I know Blair was a great Prime Minister. Boris Johnson is a great campaigner and a great communicator, and people love him and people think he's funny. Terrible Prime Minister. Terrible Prime Minister in terms of what he achieved, right? But this is what I mean. You need charisma.
This is
okay,
true.
in this day and age. And if you don't have that, good luck.
I don't know if anyone's watching, but the reason why I give Boris Johnson a lot of credit, I showed my dad this the other day. There's this video of him from when he was Prime Minister and all the stuff was coming about COVID and about everything happening in Number 10 and a lot of, here and there, like he was in the wrong, he was in a bad position. So the reporters were outside his house asking him, like, la la la, do you have anything to say about this? And he just brought them out like several cups of tea. Like he had a little tray and he was wearing his nightgown and he had about 12 cups of tea and he was like, tea? And they'd be like, Boris, do you have to comment on this? Tea? Would you like some tea? Like, Boris, no, do you have anything to say? Would you like sugar? Sugar with the tea? And it was so comedic and fantastic the way it broke the cycle. It's human. I think that even though I believe he's a political animal, you could say, I think that he really broke the boundaries of politics in that sense. He stopped being a politician. He started being a regular guy. He was like, I want to have a cup of tea. I know you guys want to have a cup of tea. Let's stop talking about the sticky stuff for a second. Let's move away from that. And that type of charisma and relatability is exactly what you're talking about and what we need from Keir Starmer.
And the thing is, the issue, I've read some research on this, people think Keir Starmer's too posh. They didn't think Boris Johnson was too posh.
Which is ridiculous.
How ironic is this? An Eton graduate, right? Versus someone who comes from a working class background. You see, that is the perception difference.
Exactly.
It's amazing because, working class people don't want someone who seems too posh.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Tony Blair didn't seem too posh. Theresa May probably seemed a little bit posh, but, she was likable.
She was refined.
Likeable, etc. So the other interesting question here is, do you think, Freddie, somebody from his cabinet can be the new leader, or do you think they need to go outside the cabinet because you think they're tainted with the stain of Keir now?
I think that they are capable of finding a new leader within the cabinet. I think they're capable of it, but they need an excellent marketing strategy and they need an excellent campaign manager to really turn the whole thing around and get Keir gone, banish him from the party. He can't be seen anymore. And I think that they need to really start pushing back against Farage. Why not have more open debates?
Totally.
Out in public. Why not have them confronting each other in real public spaces? I think there's a lot of respect given to these far-right populist parties when maybe they should be held back. Maybe we should have legislation in place even, like they have in Germany, to kind of restrict the power that they're gaining, or even just the danger of misinformation itself, right? It's long been a thing in politics that politicians are allowed to say whatever they want, and I know that's not going to change. But you think it's different when you think about the medical industry, right? They're not allowed to lie about what's in drugs, and they're not allowed to lie about what they do. But why are politicians allowed to lie about policies that really directly affect each and every citizen and impact our future and the future of like the global economy and community as a whole? It feels like there should be more of an emphasis on telling the truth, and maybe if we just started calling out those parties for that, we would be heading in the right direction. But instead we're giving them free rein and letting them do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah, I agree. So, a little assessment of the candidates. Wes Streeting is Health Secretary. Quite charismatic. He's gay, so that might go against him in terms of the standard populace, etc. Angela Rayner was the Deputy Prime Minister. She had this stain of her local taxes, so she had to resign, so that's not a good scenario. She's very working class and comes across really well in that. But again, if you think you're competing with these far-right reform, do you want to put up a female candidate here? Think about what happened in the US. Now, I don't say the UK is like the US, but there's some similarities in this far-right. So for my money, I would put my money on Andy Burnham coming in, giving him a seat. He's super popular in Birmingham and the Midlands, and he's a really great communicator.
Look, I think about a few days ago I would have agreed with you that it's better to have a male candidate to fight against this, but I think what we saw right with what happened in New York, maybe we shouldn't be fighting fire with fire, maybe we should be fighting it with water. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you need a candidate that is so obviously different that they can win. And look, America's a very different place. They've never had a female president. They've never had a South Asian president. So there was too many minority groups represented by Kamala Harris for her to ever be successful, right? There was too much going on there. And there's a lot of other factors involved. I think the UK is a very different animal. And I think that if you put up a female candidate, maybe not Angela Rayner, because sounds like she's got a bit of a background that maybe might not be that suitable, but someone inspirational, someone who can inspire people as much as Mamdani inspired people in a different way, in a way to bring people together, rather than just another representative of like the political institutional power.
Well, that's
of the
why
Labour Party.
That's why I think in a way, Wes or Andy. Wes is a great communicator. He's young. He's really passionate.
I also think if you're very young, I think that's another defining feature that could really give you a boost. But I think that putting another old white guy, similar kind of age, I don't know if they're a similar age to Keir Starmer, in the role, I think people find it difficult to distinguish between candidates.
It'll be interesting anyway. So I think either of those could be the candidates, or there could be a third candidate from within the government that we're not talking
I'm just saying that I think it's very possible that you could do that, and if you don't do a good enough marketing campaign, brand makeover, then people aren't going to believe that they're any different. They're just going to think they're another representative of the Labour Party itself, and they have no individual policies or individual charisma, unless he did an outstanding job and made himself stand apart. But I just can't expect that from anyone nowadays.
But you know, people are saying, oh, it's a risk to get rid of Keir Starmer. It's the bigger risk to keep him, you know, because there's no way they're going to win the election, and they're walking into the Biden problem. If he stays around around for too long, there won't be enough time for the new person to take on Farage and ensure he doesn't become Prime Minister of the UK.
At this point, I just think that we should all be standing up to the far-right parties. Can the Tories get their bloody act together?
Well, this is a good point, because if you think about what happened in Germany, why is it not that the Lib Dems, Labour and the Tories, why couldn't they all get together and say reform is unacceptable, la la la? And you know, why don't they have a rainbow coalition of those three? But there's nothing that says that you can't do that. It would be a new thing for the UK, but why not?
Look, I agree, but it's just not. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen because I think it is ego. And I think it's the age-old issue of politics. The people who get into politics aren't necessarily just there for the welfare of everyone else. They're there because they enjoy the game. And they enjoy their parties, and they enjoy the faith they have and their loyalty to their different parties. And, you know, as an outside viewer and spectator on the whole thing, we could say, yes, a very obvious solution is to stand together as central parties and say, hey, look, we're not going to put up with this radical right-wing movement. We're not going to let our country go to the dogs. And we're going to sacrifice some of our pride in order to save these institutions that we care about so much. And you'd hope that politicians would do that. But I don't know about you, but I can't see the Labour or the Liberal Party being willing to give up their independence anytime soon.
Labour Party doesn't need to in Australia. They're in a really strong position.
I'm not talking about Australia.
Oh, in the UK now, still.
Oh, the Tories, sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the Farrer by-election. And
moving on to our Australia segment. And before we introduce this little interview, why don't we just do a quick rundown on what's happened?
What's happened, yes.
In Farrer, because I'm not sure if we've really gone into detail on that, and the conditions that have led to the rise of One Nation. Do you want to do a bit?
Sure. Well, this is the first federal lower house seat for One Nation, and they had a dramatic result. If you think about on the primary, 39.5% of the primary vote went to One Nation, 28.4% to Michelle Millthorpe, the Independent, 12.4% to the Liberal Party, and 9.7% to the Nationals. Now, if you think about this, is where the Liberal Party was formed in Albury. This has been a coalition seat for 80 years, okay? So there was a 30-something point drop in the coalition vote, and it fundamentally just transferred to One Nation. Okay, a few variances, but to One Nation. Such a dramatic swing we have never seen in Australia. Now, the Liberals and the Nationals said that they would preference One Nation ahead of the Independent, and I think this has opened Pandora's box. This is the stupidity of the Liberal and National parties, because I actually think it's given permission for all those Liberal and National voters to vote for One Nation. Okay, because they say the Liberal Party is giving their preferences to them, so they must be okay. Maybe they're not so racist, and maybe they're not so radical. So let's. Or
maybe it's okay to be racist.
Yeah, maybe it's
okay to be radical.
Yeah.
I think that's almost what it's saying. I think that the far right has been brought into the centre of politics, even though it's not, but people perceive it as being more of an average opinion of what everyone is thinking. But yeah, no, I agree. I think this is almost the same thing that we were just talking about with the UK, right? It's the ignorance and the ego of these parties not willing to support the more moderate parties that actually have very similar policies to them. I would say the Labour Party, its policies are not that different to the Liberals if you compare them side by side when it comes to a number of things. But, you know, of course, yes.
Yeah, but you'll hear about from Steve the issues on the ground when we speak to him. Some issues of water security for the farmers, right? Because of the Murray-Darling scheme. The water issue, the guns issue, you know, the more restricting of guns. You know, he's got friends who have 12 guns, but 8 of them are historic guns that no longer work. His grandfather and father had them. They're sort of antiques, etc., but they've got to be given up as well. So there's some strange things like that. And I think the fundamental issue is people don't feel listened to, and they don't feel anyone's representing them in the country, right, in Farrer, etc. And so they say, okay, let's change the system. And that's the promise of One Nation. We will fix it. We will tear it down. And this is the usual sort of right wing.
No, I mean, I understand. What I was saying is just that anyone could have filled this spot, right? The voters wanted something different. They wanted a change. One Nation was not necessarily what they were waiting for. They weren't waiting for a One Nation type party to enter the fray and to vote for them. They've always been around. It's that the parties were no longer fulfilling the role that they wanted them to fulfill. And it's that no one else stepped up to the plate. And maybe
Correct.
the independent did step up to the plate, but the parties had too much ego in order to support them. Even though it would have benefited the parties in the end, right? If they had supported the independent, it wouldn't have hit their parties as hard, I believe, because they would have in the future had the potential to win back those seats. But I think endorsing a small party like One Nation gives One Nation the foundation to build their future campaigns across and to win all the seats that the coalition has given up.
I think you're right, but I think the coalition strategists were thinking if Michelle Milthorpe, an independent, gets in, they've never been able to unseat any independent. The only example is Goldstein, where Tim Wilson unseated the independent, the Teal independent. The Liberal Party thought better to have a One Nation person because we can unseat them because they'll be a flash in the pan. I think they've misjudged badly, and I think it potentially is the beginning of the end of the party because they don't simply have any policies. It'll be interesting. Angus Taylor, in his budget reply speech, we'll get on to the budget in a little while, is on Thursday. I'll be very interested whether he has any policy chops in his response, because if they don't, they're finished.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think it's interesting as well with One Nation because they tacked onto a very specific thing. One Nation focuses on anti-immigrant sentiment, specifically.
Well, isn't that the problem of the country? We have too many immigrants causing everything.
Of course, it's the only problem. Is Islamophobic sentiment, and that's what it's tacking onto. It's not anything else. It's not trying to do Trump style politics. It has a Trump style politics, but it's not taking all of Trump's policies and redoing them. It's very specifically Islamophobic sentiment.
The interesting thing is they also brought up the gas tax. They're in support of it. You see, this is what happens when the government is not courageous enough and doesn't do the right things for the country. These right-wing parties will fill the void, right? And that's not a bad thing in this case, because if they got together with the Independents and the Greens and put a gas tax in place, hooray, hooray, good for them.
Definitely, I agree. Look, I think I just get a bit tired because it seems there's very clear answers to all of this, and I think that we're so used to defining political choices in the two cleavages of politics, in left wing and right wing. Those are just made up terms, by the way. In case you've never considered that, what is to be left of something and what is to be right? How do we come up with this ideological reasoning for spaces in politics? It's a very interesting phenomena. And we should question ourselves, what is it about the left wing even that Albo is scared of? What is he scared of? Of putting in these taxes, which will ultimately help a ton of Australians. What is it about doing these water distribution policies that indirectly affect Adelaide and now affecting Farah and are turning the course of this election in Farah? What is it about these left-wing policies that the Labor government is scared of, which is pushing all the voters into the hands of One Nation? Because they're not... It's like the voters are asking for progressive policy, whether they know it or not. They're asking for climate policy that will protect them in the advance of, droughts and harsh weather conditions, and they're not getting that.
But I think the world has radically changed, and I think politicians are struggling to keep up with this wish for more radical solutions and more courageous solutions. Hi everyone, good to see you again. I'm here with Steve Gates, an old friend of mine from university days. Steve, good to see you.
Thank you, Mark. Good to see you.
Now, Steve has been in the last Farah by-election, which seems a long time ago, but it was just last Saturday, supporting Michelle Milthorpe, the community independent in Farah. And I thought it would be really interesting to get, Steve's voice from the front line of, this huge change in politics in Australia. The One Nation bandwagon rolled through Farah, and it's now a One Nation seat. So I think it's really interesting to hear from Steve what's on the minds of voters from Farah And what are some of the interactions there? Now, picture this. He is supporting Michelle Milthorpe, handing out flyers and also doing scrutineering on the vote. So, Steve, thanks for your commitment to our democracy. It's fantastic. And he had interactions with the One Nation, people handing out flyers, etc., etc. Steve, tell me just a little bit about you and tell us about how you got involved with Michelle Milthorpe.
Mark, I moved to the bush over 35 years ago. 33 years of that, I've been involved in agriculture, with working with farmers. I got involved with Michelle because she basically taught my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I got to know Michelle through parent-teacher nights. My daughter,
So she's a teacher. Her profession is a teacher before she went into politics, okay?
she is a teacher. And
Fantastic.
according to my kids, she was a damn good one. My younger daughter used to babysit her kids because she'd go off to work, so we'd drop my daughter at her place and she'd breakfast them and all the rest of it, and then she'd jump on the school bus and go to school, and then we drop off, So we've just had that connection for a long time, and at the end of the day, Michelle is an honourable individual, and she's the sort of persons, rather, that we need in Parliament.
Exactly.
And she cared about her community. She cared about the electorate. So, yeah, I jumped on board.
Fantastic. And you were helping her out, so that was on pre-polling and then on Saturday. So tell us about the vibe in Farrer on the day on Saturday.
Saturday was interesting. The first hour, which is before people go off to the local football, I was abused 4 times. I was told to go away twice, but not in those polite terms in the first.
No, that's fine. Steve, you can tell us exactly how it is. This podcast, we're not controlled and stuff. There's kids not watching. So tell us exactly, what people said to you if you feel comfortable.
Look, when I was handing out pre-poll, Mark, I decided, because I get annoyed when I vote, and I decided that I'd sit back and think, okay, what don't I like? So I decided I was going to do something differently. I was very low-key. I wasn't in your face and all the rest of it. And, you'd hand out these brochures and, 2 blokes told me to get effed. That was in the first half an hour. In the next 15 minutes, I was told that we're not voting for Michelle. She's a toxic bitch. And 15 minutes later, I made some joke about how people smile before they go into the booth and smile when they come out. And I made this joke, and one bloke said to me, yeah, because I didn't have to vote for that bloody cow.
So, Steve, what do you think? Do you think these misogynistic comments are worse than day to day? It brings it out of people. What do you think's behind it, right? Just that she's a woman and they don't appreciate a woman running like that?
No, Mark, I don't think that's the case because our local member for the last 25 years is a woman.
Exactly.
Now, I've never, because of work commitments and the enormous travelling I did through those commitments, I was never able to help Susan out in hers. I got to know her quite well through her campaign manager, who was a client of mine for...
Right.
He's probably my longest term client that I've ever had. So I got to know Susan quite well. To be honest, I think the Liberals ran a very, very, very successful smear campaign in that she was a teal.
Right.
Which is wrong. 35-year career in agriculture, I wouldn't have supported her if she was a teal.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing I think is not that I watch Sky After Dark, which I refer to as SAD.
Yes.
Some of the vitriol that came from them that I saw on, YouTube and things like that, friends had sent me.
Right.
Particularly from 2 female commentators.
Right.
I think it triggered fear in people.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to the trouble of looking at other news articles. They're just looking at Sky News.
Sure.
And these 2 female commentators, and I stress female commentators, really disparaged her. And it was just so unfair and so unnecessary. We see it in the US all the time. We don't need to see it in this country.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. So she did really well, right? She came second in the primary vote after One Nation and got more votes than the Liberal and National Party combined. So she should feel very proud. If it wasn't for several things, if it wasn't for the momentum of One Nation, and if it wasn't for the stupid coalition giving their preferences to One Nation, she might have come very close, right?
Look, she could have. you got to remember too, and I do not want to criticise Michelle because she challenged our sitting member Susan Lay, who became deputy of obviously opposition leader.
Yep.
She did phenomenally well. She forced Susan into preferences,
Yep.
election by preferences, for the first time in 25 years. She did an amazing job. And then 12 months later, she fronts up again to have another crack. But she was up against the Liberals, who were quite toxic. She was up against all this sort of thing. She did phenomenally well. But my gut feeling is that she focused on the things that weren't important across the whole electorate and didn't focus hard enough. Even though she had strong positions on the other things, she didn't focus hard enough on them.
So what are those issues that you think she could have focused a little more on that you hear on the street?
Firstly, water. Secondly, water. Thirdly, water. Fourthly, water. Okay? Let's get water out of the way. Communications. In a previous life before I was semi-retired, I used to travel all across the Farrer electorate, and 3/4 of the time I had absolutely no phone reception.
Right. Crazy.
Everyone's forced to go into the more expensive options like Skylink because the government are not providing that. Fertiliser and fuel, with the recent situation, are a major issue because we've got people now that are struggling to put their crops in because they haven't got the fuel to power their tractors. They haven't got the fertilisers to grow their crops. Now, when we look at farming, we need 2 nutrients to put the crop in. One is phosphorus, one is nitrogen. And then, particularly with our wheat and canola crops, we need top-ups of nitrogen during the year to boost the yields if seasons permit. Now, we used to manufacture nitrogen in this country. We can't anymore because the governments, federal and Labor and Liberal/National, have made gas availability so expensive in this country, it's not viable to manufacture the nitrogen. Now, there's been a big song and dance about Albanese going overseas and securing nitrogen supply. The bottom line is we're not getting that nitrogen until August. We need to start top dressing our crops in June and then follow up top dress in July.
So Steve, there's water, right? There is the telecommunications and there is fuel and fertilizer supply, right? These are all very practical things. So it's not like, was One Nation purporting that they would fix all those things or not?
Not really, no.
They were just saying, it's not working, so try something new fundamentally.
Basically, it's the other two haven't delivered, we will. But there's been no hard and fast pathways in which they can deliver.
Steve, it's a really good roadmap for anyone wanting to win back country votes. Your whole point about the water and the perception of fairness of that between the states, between New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. South Australia is getting, more than their fair share. And that seems unfair to people. The telecommunications thing, having worked in communications myself, this is not a difficult thing to fix. It just requires money and investment to do it. And then, I think the government has done as good a job as they can with the system we have, but you're right about sovereign capability, both fuel refining and fertilizer refining. It's bloody obvious a country like Australia should be somewhat self-sufficient in that refinery scenario. So I think the government's got to fix that going forward. The other thing I want to just touch on is guns. You were telling me about, given the Bondi massacre, and of course laws are going to be strengthened, particularly in New South Wales, etc. And again, One Nation saying we'll protect your guns in a sense. Tell me about that friend of yours and how he was feeling.
Okay, as a result of the dreadful tragedy that happened at Bondi, the Albanese government, in conjunction with the Labor states, are deciding to tighten gun laws even further. Now, I was a complete supporter of Howard and Tim Fisher of what they did. There is no need for an M16 on your farm. But we have sporting shooters now being told they can only have 4 guns. Primary producers can have 10. Now, having used guns, I'm not a sporting shooter, but I've used guns. You use 1 gun for rabbits, 1 gun for rats, 1 gun for euthanizing your livestock that are sick, 1 gun. All these different guns serve a different purpose because every sporting shooter wants to achieve a clean kill. In other words, 1 shot, 1 death, all humane. What they're saying now is that you can only have this level. Now, I've got a friend of mine, and the initial figures I told you were wrong. I spoke to him overnight.
Go ahead.
He's got 15 guns. He is a sporting shooter. He goes out to shoot pigs, feral dogs, all the vermin that we want in this country. He only uses 6 guns on a regular basis. The rest of his guns are antiques that he cannot get ammunition for. There are guns that belong to his grandfather, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, all these guns, huge sentimental value. Even if he was to take the pins out of the guns so that they could not technically fire any ammunition, the government's saying, doesn't matter. More than 10, we're taking them off you. Now,
Crazy.
if anyone blames wrongly the Muslim population for what happened in Bondi, they would rightly be criticised and shot down in flames. But the gun owners get demonised. And it's a latent thing. And this is not Donald Trump, US,
Sure.
We need to have every gun in the world and as many as we want and no gun safes. This is
See,
not that.
what you're explaining is the lack of consultation and the lack of a practical approach, right? As someone naive about this stuff, I thought, okay, 4 guns is enough. But when you explain it, 1 gun's for, vermin and 1 gun's for livestock, etc., I get it. So leverage it, for a farmer to be, 6 guns, whatever the number is, right? And antiques are a different category that can't be, it's not that hard, right? I mean, this is really not that hard to come up with this scenario. Again, it goes to this point in the views of the country people and farmers are not being heard sufficiently. And this is probably why the coalition is in such strife as well, because they've sort of been a bit lazy, right? They haven't really represented this properly, even though they've been the members.
Look, there's a lot of anger out there because no one wants to talk about the difficult things. They don't want to talk about water. They've been told for years they need to fix the fuel stockpile. They've never done it. This is both sides. They've been told about the worry about domestic production for fertiliser. They've never done a thing. They never consulted anyone about the guns. If they turn around and said, okay, you can have these antique guns, but we want police to inspect them to make sure they can't be fired, then you can hang on to them. The other thing that they're doing is to get a gun licence, you normally get it for 5 years.
Yep.
They're restricting that to 2 years. Now, between applying to renew your gun licence and get it renewed is a 6-month period. Can we imagine the stress that's going to put on the enforcement agents? By bringing
Crazy
it,
stuff.
it's absolutely crazy. And
Stephen?
the country people feel that no one gives a damn about us, Mark.
Right.
And I get that.
Tell us about the other thing I wanted to ask was, what do you think the impact of the Liberals giving preferences to One Nation was? Do you think it allowed more people to vote for One Nation with a clear conscience?
I didn't think it made any difference at all.
No. Okay.
I think whether the Libs did or didn't, people were going to vote One Nation because what One Nation was saying.
So you think the Libs have sort of lost it? They've lost it because nobody knows what they stand for, right? Libs and Nationals.
And the thing that needs to be clear to your listeners is that One Nation are typically portrayed as having a racist profile, cutting immigrants and all that sort of thing. All the people I've spoken to, that never came into their calculations. Griffith thrives on...
Yeah, it's a big immigrant population, right?
They employ immigrants. I've got farming friends that employ immigrants. A lot of them have actually said to me they don't like One Nation's. They see it as a racist policy.
Right.
But it's everything else that One Nation are offering. And at the end of the day, I think it was basically, and there was an article, in one of the newspapers, I think it might have been the Australian. We had the big banana, we had the big prawn,
Big sheep.
the big something else, and from Farah is the big finger. And that's what they're doing. They're saying, we're tired of you're not delivering for us.
Yeah. No, Steve, that's really interesting because really it's not so much a racism, it's sort of like piss off the normal parties because they haven't done anything for us. So One Nation's giving them an avenue for that. If the Liberals and the Nationals had actually said, we're going to fix communication, right? So you have full coverage. We're going to have sovereign, fuel and fertilizer. We're going to make the water thing more balanced. Suddenly they'd be rather popular, right? Because there'd be really practical stuff, but they've never said that.
They would be. And I think, I've read a lot of press work because I do like my politics. I'm a bit strange.
I know you do.
A lot of people have been talking about the orange wave and all the rest of it and blah, blah, blah. Sorry, no. The bottom line is the people of Farah are sick to death of being taken for granted. They're sick to death of politicians not giving a damn about stuff that impacts us. And I think One Nation has given the people of Farah an opportunity to say, up yours, in exactly the same way that when the Keneally Labor government fell, whenever it was, ago, so many seats went to the Liberals. And yet the following election, so many of those seats went back to Labor.
Yeah, it's a great
It
point.
was just a protest vote. That's
It's
all
really a
it-
great point. And so your friend Michelle, do you think she'll front up again? Because she could have a good chance next time. If One Nation don't deliver, who knows?
Well, I told her she'd be a bloody idiot if she did.
If she did, yeah.
But I also told her if you do, you are that stupid and you are going to have a crack again, count me in. Because I think what she stands for, and I think of her broader message, I mean, she focused on an issue which was largely a state issue. If she focuses on the issues that are largely a federal issue and promotes them positively with real solutions, how she's going to help them out. I think she would have romped the last election. Well, no, she would not have romped the last election in. The One Nation thing, the protest was so strong. But yeah, next time I think because she'd be a great local member. She's a decent, honourable human being.
Totally. Steve, hey, thanks so much for your time. It's great to hear the news straight from the front line and look forward to having you on again.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I enjoyed it. And sorry Freddie wasn't here to join us, but next time maybe.
Next time. All right, Steve, thanks a lot. So I think we're going to get on to the budget in a minute, but if I give credit to Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, he wanted this budget to be one of the most ambitious that has ever been put forward. Now, there's arguments about whether it is, but they have been courageous with some of their elements of the budget. And if I just summarise some of the key points of the budget, they've changed the capital gains tax treatment. Now, for those who don't know, in 1999, Howard decrease the capital gains tax amount by 50% if you kept a property or you kept stock, etc., for more than a year. So it was dramatic, and as a result of that, house prices have gone up 400% since 99. Okay, good for everyone who has houses, not so good for your generation wanting to buy a house and get into that scenario, right? And it actually encouraged people to put more of their investment into housing than other investment vehicles because it was very good. So they're going to get rid of that 50% discount on capital gains. And going forward, if your property goes up in value more than inflation, okay, so you discount it for inflation, you'll pay a minimum of 30% tax on that capital gain over time. Not good for people like me, etc., but I understand the need for the country to do this, and I think it's the right move. Second thing is negative gearing. You bought a property, etc., you were paying interest on that. You could offset the loss on that property if you'd taken out a big mortgage against other income. You might have had a regular job. You could offset your tax on that regular job by the loss you made on that property. Going forward, they're grandfathering it, which is a good thing because you have to do that in Australian context because you'd have uproar if you didn't grandfather it because people made investment decisions based on the old scenario. But going forward from 2027, July, gearing will only be available on new properties. You buy an apartment off the plan, you build a new house, etc., so to help the housing supply. For old properties, you will not be able to negatively gear those properties. You won't be able to, if you buy an old property in a year's time, you won't be able to take that loss on the property against your income. That's going away. So rather dramatic, and people have lost elections on these topics. That's why I say they're dramatic. The third thing is family trusts, etc., which really only affect the top 5% of the populace, the very wealthy people. They put money into family trusts, and to reduce or minimise their taxation, they're going to be a minimum tax of 30% going forward. Okay, so again, a big move. And then the fourth big thing is major savings in the NDIS. Some extra spending on defence and major savings in the NDIS, plus a whole lot of, new investments in the supply of housing to increase the supply of housing. So rather ambitious and rather courageous, but given their majority, it's time for the government to spend their political capital, and I give them great credit for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I agree. I think that it could have become a very dangerous thing having a government with a supermajority, and I think there has been a few things that Labour has put through that are quite questionable. But I agree, it's a very electorally controversial topic to start interfering with negative gearing, and it's impressive that they're finally doing something about that. But you'd say, if they have the confidence to do something like that, why don't they have the confidence to do something that the entire population is asking for, like taxing our exports?
Well, I agree, Freddie, but I think about that strategically. Do they want to fire all their guns at once? Okay, they're several years out from an election. Prior to the election, 6 months before, they have a tax cut for all Australians. They put in place the resources rent tax, the 25% on gas. I get it. I think they will do it. I agree with you. I think they should have done it now, but I think they will do it.
I think that we've gotten used to an era of Trump-style politics where, moves are happening every single day. New policy is being put through every single day. And I think that if we're going to live in that world, if the Trump administration, with all its chaos and, the classified files going on the internet, etc., is being as successful as it is in implementing policy and really reconstructing the entire identity of America and its foreign policy and its domestic policy, I think the Labour Party can do a little bit more.
It's true, but you've got to think about Albanese is inherently conservative in his approach, and that's how he won the election, right? He was very measured. If you think about Jim Chalmers wants to be far more ambitious than Albanese because he wants to be a Prime Minister in the future, and this is his opportunity to set himself as a reformer. Whereas Albanese is kind of not fat, he's not physically fat, but comfortable, fat, dumb and happy. Comfortable because he got there by being incremental. So I think it's good the influence Chalmers has had on him. Let's be more ambitious. If we're not, we're going to open the way for one nation, etc. So I think that's quite smart.
I agree. Keep the media saturated with everything you're doing as opposed to everything you're not doing, is what I would say. And I think that's a good time to end the podcast for today.
Nice chatting with you. Hope you enjoyed this session, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
See you in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.